Okay. Okay, so good morning and Shavua Tov. We would speak today, Bezat Hashem, on Rav Dov Ber. Rav Dov Ber, Ber, as you can imagine, is in Yiddish means a dove, a bear. So it's the same name basically, Dov Ber. And Rav Dov Ber is better known as the Maggid of Mezeritch. The Maggid of Mezeritch. Mezeritch is the name of a city in back Poland, nowadays Ukraine. And Maggid means a darshan, someone who gives sermons. So that's a Maggid. He's like a teller, right? Magid is telling. So he's a Maggid, is a darshan, and he is from Mezeritch. Now he is known as the disciple of the Baal Shem Tov. So we speak here about the Chassidut, and he is the second generation. Baal Shem Tov is the first generation, and the Maggid of Mezeritch is the second generation to the Chassidut. It is the last generation in which there is only one Rebbe in the generation, because the students of the Maggid would already, each one of them, establish his own court of Chassidim. So he would have Rabbi Zusha, and he would have Rabbi Elimelech, and he would have Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev, and he would have the Rabbi Shneur Zalman Miladi, the Baal Tanya, the founder of the Chabad. And I hope that at least some of the names that I just mentioned ringing. And that's these are the great rebbes of the third generation. So we are just a second before the big boom, right? A second before Chassidut would explode all around East Europe. And the Maggid Mezeritch is a model for a Hasidic court, because the Baal Shem Tov, the founder, who is seen as the founder of Hasidism, did not really have a court. He had a group of very learned persons that were disciples of him. But Rav Dov Ber Mezeritch is the first one to really establish a Hasidic court, and we have many of his Torot, of his teachings of Torah, but what we have even more are stories. So there are many stories about the Baal Shem Tov as well, but I didn't count. But it is my impression that we have even more stories about the Maggid Mezeritch, and it is clear that the vehicle of stories is utilized, not only Torah, but also stories are utilized as a vehicle of teaching and of learning. So how many, and again, we say it in the beginning of every shiur, but when we speak about the great Hasidic masters, that should be even more emphasized, and that is how many of these stories are historical in the sense of history. That is to be, I guess, that is to be argued from now till the time of Mashiach. But all of these stories are great teachings of his. So we would use these stories, or at least the versions that I found the most educating, and also that seem to me at least can be accurate. I cannot guarantee you to anything, but they seem as can be accurate. So the Maggid was born in, we are not really sure about his date of birth, but around 1710. Around 1710. So again, it's the 18th century in Poland, in Volin, which back then was Poland, but nowadays is Ukraine. And the story goes, he was born to an important family, so he's not coming from some poor and ignorant family. He's coming from a powerful and educated family. And the story goes that when he was 5 years old, there was a fire in the city. Back then it was extremely common. All the houses were made out of wood. There were not yet waters in the houses. So when you needed to put out fire, it took a long time, and it had a great effort. So there was a fire. From time to time, there would be fire consuming, and everyone was lighting by fire and heating by fire. So it was only a matter of time that fire would break up. So in one of these fires, the house of the family of the young boy, Dov Ber, was burned down to the ground. And Dov Ber stands outside, he's 5 years old, and he sees his mother crying her soul out. And he's asking her, according to the story, is our house worth so much for you to cry for? And the mother answers, it's not the house I'm crying, it's not the earthly possessions, but we have a book of our ancestors, a list of, it's called Megillat Yuchassin in Hebrew. So we have a list of the father, where do we come from? And in this Megillah, this scroll, this book, goes back to, it's according to some of the versions to Rav Haigaon, according to some of the versions to the Tana Rabbi Yochanan Sandlar, according to another version to David HaMelech. So that's a very old and ancient Megillah. That is why I'm crying for that cannot be replaced. All earthly possessions can be replaced. But rewriting this Megillat Yuchassin, these books of genealogy of our family, after it was destroyed, I mean, nowadays I guess that anyone can rewrite everything that he wants, but at least according to the story, you cannot make it up. So that's a loss that we cannot replace. So the child told her, do not worry, for me they would begin a new Megillat Yuchassin. So that's the story. Again, how much is it accurate? I do not know. It's a beautiful story. Now, he was born, as I said, to a very important family. He was a distant relative of one of the big Torah genius scholars of the generation, who was called the Pnei Yehoshua, after his book. And he went to learn, at a certain age, he went to learn in his yeshiva. Again, this is according to the stories. There are some disputes, but we would go with the art scroll version, we'd call that. So he learned by the Pnei Yehoshua, and he was in the beginning he was a chassid of the old fashion. So not the Baal Shem Tov light had not shown up yet. So he's a chassid of the old fashion. What does it mean, a chassid of the old fashion? That means in Ashkenaz, that means that you are fasting. It means that you are rolling in the snow. It means that you are learning Yomam Valayla, day and night, and you do not take your eyes off the book. That is what is called being a chassid of the old fashion. And according again to another story, when the Pnei Yehoshua was living in a name called Torchin, some of you may know people called Torchiner. So Torchiner means someone that came from Torchin. That's again the city. It is all in the same area in eastern Poland, which is now called Ukraine. So in this place called Torchin, he would walk every morning to there was a river there, and he would go there to make a tevilah, right? To take we know what tevilah is. So is going there to take a dive into the river every morning. Now you can guess that in Poland, 90% of the year, that means that you are going to be in the snow. And the story goes that when you would go back from his tevilah there, the blood from his feet, from the soles of his feet, would cover the snow. So from the pains that he was suffering, because his shoes were torn, and his legs were bleeding, and he didn't even notice, but he would immediately go to the Bet Knesset, to the shul, to daven, and there also it was very cold, and when he began to daven and only came to Baruch she'amar, he was so hot from the davening, he had to throw off his shawl, his talit, because he was so hot. So you can see that's the chassid of the old school, of the old fashion. Now, and it is being told in many, many sources, so that seems to be completely accurate, that he had, he had a problem with his leg foot. So his left leg, he couldn't really stand on, so he was walking by canes. I'm not sure if that is an outcome of him making this tefillot during the Choref for many years, or if he was born like that. It is not clear, at least to me from the stories, but it is sure that he was suffering very much from his feet, already in the middle age, you would say. And as I said, he was, so he was mugbal in his movement. How would you say mugbal? Restricted, thank you so much. So he was restricted in his movement and he would walk with canes. Now that seems to be the cause to his meeting with the Baal Shem Tov, because the Baal Shem Tov was known as a healer. So he would heal either by natural forces or by supernatural forces. That's how the Baal Shem Tov became known in the local area. And according to some of the researchers, Baal Shem, the owner of the name, means that you can use divine names, the names of angels, for healing. So all the healers were called Baal Shem. But the Baal Shem Tov was a good one, he was a successful one, so he was called the Baal Shem Tov. That's how his nickname became the Baal Shem Tov. So people were urging Rav Dov Ber, who was known as a lamdan, as a scholar, and as a chassid of the old fashion. They would say to him, go to the Baal Shem Tov and ask him that he would heal you. That's according to some of the stories. According to other of the stories, the Baal Shem Tov was told by none other than the Pnei Yoshua himself. His Rav himself told him, you should go to the Baal Shem Tov in order to learn Kabbalah, in order to advance in your spiritual life and walk. And fine. So in the end, they were able to convince the Maggid to go to the Baal Shem Tov and learn, and be healed or learned Torah, which not necessarily are separated from each other. So the Maggid comes to the Baal Shem Tov, and the story goes, a very interesting story. There are a few versions. Again, I will tell you my hybrid version, which I hope captures all the interesting and important points. So he comes to the Baal Shem Tov, and obviously that's a very long journey on horse. And in the meantime, he's not able to learn because he's on the horse. He's not on the horse, he's on the wagon. But on the wagon, you cannot really learn, and he suffers from not learning because he's so used to learn Yomam Valeil, day and night. And also, obviously, his legs are giving him pain. So he's really suffering. And a few times he thinks maybe he should just turn around and go back home. But he says, no, let's give it a try. And he comes to the Baal Shem Tov. And he meets the Baal Shem Tov and he enters the room. And the Baal Shem Tov begins to speak with him, not about Gemara, not about Halacha, not about Kabbalah. He begins to speak with him about horses. And here there are different versions. What exactly did he tell him about horses? But it's obviously told him, he spoke for an hour about horses, white horse, red horse. Now, according to one of the versions, he told him, my horses do not eat matzah. Now, obviously, the Maggid was completely bewildered, meaning he came to someone who's supposed to be steeped in Kabbalah and the holy man and the healer, and what does he get? A balagala, right? A wagon driver, someone that speaks about horses. So he sits there, and after an hour, the visit ends, and they shake hands, and he goes out. And he says to his driver, we are going home. There is nothing here. And the driver says, it's going to be nightfall in a few hours. We'll not be able to reach a settlement, Jewish settlement. So what we should do, we would wait till midnight. In midnight, the moon would shine. You know that sometimes the moon shine is differing, is changing according to the season. So the moon would shine in midnight, and then there would be enough light, and we can take off at midnight. The Maggid says, fine, we'd wait till midnight. A quarter to midnight, a knock on the door in the room where the Maggid sits. And this is a messenger from the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov wants to see you. Okay, so the Maggid says, I would go and bid farewell. I guess that's proper. And Rav Dov Ber comes to the Baal Shem Tov to bid farewell. And the Baal Shem Tov says, I understand that you are leaving. The Maggid says, yes, I am happy. Thank you for speaking with me. And yeah, I'm going back home. The Baal Shem Tov says, Rav Dov Ber, do you know how to learn? Now, he is learning for the last 30 years, right? 40 years. And so the Maggid says, yes, I know how to learn. And the Baal Shem Tov says, yeah, they told me you can learn. And do you know anything about Kabbalah? About the Zohar? And the Maggid says, yeah, I learned a few things. the Baal Shem Tov takes out from his bookshelf a Zohar Sefer. And he opens it in a certain point and says, read. And okay, Rav Dov Ber reads the passage, and then the Baal Shem Tov says, now explain. And he explains. And the Baal Shem Tov says, no, you're wrong. That's not the explanation. And the Maggid tries again, and the Baal Shem Tov again says, no, that's not the explanation. Rav Dov Ber is very, he's a modest man. So he says, please give me your explanation. And if it is different, I would obviously, and if it's correct, I would change my mind. And the Baal Shem Tov says, first, when you learn the Zohar, you should not sit. You should stand. So they both stand. And then the Baal Shem Tov says to him, now I will explain the passage. And then he says exactly the words that the Maggid that Rav Dov Ber said. But every word that the Baal Shem Tov says, suddenly a malach appears in the room. It's the same explanation, the same story, the same question, the same answer, but it comes to life. And Rav Dov Ber obviously is out of words. He's out of words. He falls down, according to the story, and he loses conscience. In the morning, he wakes up, and the Baal Shem Tov tells him, I sent away the wagon with the driver. You wouldn't need it, because in the next year, you are staying here. And Rav Dov Ber says, fine, I would like to be your disciple, I would like to be your student. And the Baal Shem Tov says, the first thing you must learn is that horses are also important. Horses cannot eat matzah. Now, what do you mean by that? Matzah is the food of the soul. But we are made out of both soul and body. And you should feed your body. You cannot fast for weeks go on, not because it's not healthy, meaning it's also not healthy, but also because our body was also created by God. Your learning is a learning of the intellect. So you can explain the passage in the Zohar beautifully, but you cannot connect it to this world because you deny the existence of this world. You do not feed it well. In order to be able to bring the Zohar, to bring the Kabbalah, to bring the angels, to bring the divine presence into our world, you must nourish also this world. And that's why you are sick in your feet. The feet represent our connection, our grounding. So you are so high in the sky, and you are punishing your body. You do not eat, you do not drink as you should, you do not sleep as you should. So that's why when you came to me, I first spoke about horses, because my horses do not eat matzah, and your horses also should eat well. And that was the story of the meeting of the Maggid with the Baal Shem Tov, and from there on, he became an adherent disciple. According to another story, the Baal Shem Tov explained to him that he cannot heal his left foot, only the right one. Why? He told him, you are so holy that when you are moving your body in this world, the upside words, the words upstairs, are also moving according to your movements. Now, now I'm thinking much beyond my pay grade, but what they say in the stories is that the right foot is connected with the midah, with the measure of mercy, of rachamim, of chesed. So when you move your right foot, that's good. But if you'd move your left foot, the left foot is connected with the measure, with the midah of din, of judgment. Left is judgment and right is chesed. So we must restrict your movements of the left foot, because if you'd move it too much, you'd cause destruction in this world. So that's another version of the same story. And obviously the Maggid stayed. But we have to understand, the Maggid was not exactly as the Baal Shem Tov. He had a different persona. He didn't come in the age of 10 or 20. He already formed, he crystallized himself as someone else, as a chassid of the old fashion. And I think the Baal Shem Tov saw it, and now I speculate. But I think the Baal Shem Tov had young students that he was able to affect more than he could affect the Maggid. But I think he wanted someone from the old world because he wanted his Torah to be able not, chas v'chila, to replace the old Hasidism, the old Torah. But he wanted it to be an organic growth. And so he chose to be his successor, not someone that was completely impacted only by the Baal Shem Tov. He wanted someone coming from the old world, but that would understand, appreciate, and combine the new and original teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. So that's why he picked the Maggid, Rav Dov Ber, as his successor in Hasidut. Now, there are stories about the differences between them. One of the very interesting stories, let's move the sources here. So that's here in source, for the Zoom prize, the source Vav. Now, according to one of the stories, the Baal Shem Tov, when he would pray, when he would daven, he would shout out. Now, the tefillah was very active in the Baal Shem Tov little shtipel. And the Maggid couldn't stand it. As I said, he was an old-fashioned, and he couldn't stand the noise. According to some of the stories, they say it's because he was sick. So he was sick, he couldn't stand the noise. Maybe. My impression from the stories are that he couldn't stand the noise because he didn't daven like that. So he felt unease. So he would daven in another room, adjacent room, next to the shtiblech where the Hasidim would daven with the Baal Shem Tov, and he was in another room. And he would daven there. Now, the story goes that the Baal Shem Tov in Musaf of Pesach, before the Tfilat Atal. So the Baal Shem Tov would go to the mikvah before the Tfilat Atal, and he would be the Chazan, the Shliach Tzibur, for the Tfilat Atal. Fine. So he's going to the mikvah, and when he's returning from the mikvah, he goes to the small room where the Maggid was, because the kittel, this special white cloth that the Shliach Tzibur put before Musaf of in Yamim Noraim, also before Tfilat Atal, was in this small room where the Maggid was. So he steps in and he puts the kittel. Now there was some type of a wrinkle on the kittel. So the Maggid sends out his hand to straight the wrinkle. And he says, the Maggid, that's how he tells the story, that the holiness of the Baal Shem Tov was so strong that when the Maggid just touched him, it was like electric. And he says, I began to shiver. And I couldn't daven, I couldn't pray for an hour because of the trembling from the Baal Shem Tov. So here you see, I think this story is representing very much, on one hand, the difference between them. So it was such a difference that the student cannot pray together with his master in the same room. Right? That's a great separation. But on the other hand, he saw, he felt, he was connected to this trembling, to this shivering, but in his own way. In his own way. So that's the story of the tefillah in Musaf of Pesach. Now, after the ptira of the Baal Shem Tov, it was pronounced that the Maggid would be his replacer, his successor. Now, there are a few stories about how did they all came to the conclusion that the Maggid should be the one that would continue the Baal Shem Tov, to head the court after the Baal Shem Tov. And according to one of the stories, there was a little test that the Baal Shem Tov left behind him. He didn't name who would be the successor, but he left a test. What was the test? The test was that every one of the great students should answer a simple question. How do you deal with pride, with gava? And if someone would give an answer that everyone would be able to agree with, he would continue the Baal Shem Tov. Okay. So they asked each one, everyone gave his own solution to the problem of pride. When they came to the Maggid the Maggid said the problem with pride is that it's like standing on a mountain. When you stayed on the mountain is beneath you, you don't see it. So you are high, you are proud, but you do not understand that you are proud. So the only way to solve the problem of pride is to ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu to show you himself. And when you understand God and you see what God is, and you understand what greatness is, then you return to your original side. And so there is nothing in this world that can solve the problem of Gava, only turning to Hashem. And they were so inspired by this answer that everyone, they chose him as their leader. So that's how he became the leader and in truth, the founder of the phenomenon of the Hasidic court. Because the Baal Shem Tov would travel all around, but the Maggid, again, he could not travel because of his leg problems. And also, he was, as I said, he was a different persona. He was not someone to travel around. He was someone to sit and people would come to him. So he established the Hasidic court and people would come. There are many, many stories that we have about the court of the Maggid of Mezeritch, which was in, as you can understand, most of his life it was in Mezeritch. And he would give the drasha, so this was he was called the Maggid in Mezeritch. Now, one story it's an interesting testimony. Why it's an interesting testimony? Because it was written not by a Chassid and not by a Mitnaged. It was written by one of the very early Maskilim. So it's the 19th century. In Western Europe, we already have a stronger movement of Haskalah by Moshe Mendelssohn, by Moses Mendelssohn. But in Eastern Europe, so that's one generation behind. So there was no movement of Haskalah, to be sure. There were some people that were beginning to see the light, right, to be enlightened. One of them was called Shlomo, and he later adopted the name Maimon after Maimonides, after the Rambam, which he obviously, as everyone else in history, saw in his own image. So he thought that Maimonides was this ultra-rationalist, right, ultra-maskilic man. So he called himself Shlomo Maimon. He's known by the name Shlomo Maimon, and he later went to Berlin because what can a really enlightened man do in this backwater place of Russia and Poland and all of this area? So he went to Berlin to be really enlightened by these advanced people of Germany. So he went to Berlin and he became a sort of a disciple of Mendelssohn, and he later became what he became. Anyway, he also wrote a autobiography of himself, and that is a very important historical document that we have from the 18th century, written by someone living the events, and we do not have so many documents, especially not from Eastern Europe. He wrote it in German, but it was translated, and it's now for free in the Ben Yehuda project. But it's a very interesting site. I guess that some of you know the Gutenberg project that uploads for free English books and texts that are not protected by copyright anymore. So they were written more than 70 years ago. So we have a similar project in Hebrew called the Ben Yehuda project, which you can understand, Gutenberg and Ben Yehuda. So it's a very nice site, and they have his whole book. I didn't read the whole book. I read only the paragraphs that I was interested in, but they say it's very interesting, and I also found it very, very, very interesting. Now, you have to understand that's not a really historical. We have Hasidic stories, we have Mitnagdic stories, and we have Haskalah stories. Do not fall for a second to think that because he was a maskil and later in life he was an atheist, that means that he is a scientist, that everything that he writes is accurate. Very far from it. But nonetheless, it's a very fascinating book. So during his traveling, he also came to the court of Rav Dov Ber, the Maggid of Mezeritch. Now we have to understand, when he writes, Hasidut is only beginning to expand. So it's a new phenomena, and he writes to his generation about these, he called them Beris, coming from the word Ber, right? Rav Dov Ber. So his followers are Beris. So he writes about these Beris. And he says, I came to the court. When he came to the court, he was still a very young man, and he was still looking, so he was not yet enlightened. He came to Rav Dov Ber because he heard it's a new spiritual thing. Maybe that's the thing that would speak to him. So he came to him, and he describes how he came to the court, and he sat to the Shabbat table. And the Maggid would begin the Shabbat table, that's what he writes there. He would put his hand, his forehand right on his arm, and he would say the names of all the visitors and the cities they came from. That's how he would begin. And then he would ask each one of them to say a pasuk. And each one would say a pasuk. And then he would make a drasha on the spot, connecting all the different psukim that were said and delivering a personal message. Maimon writes, everyone would feel that there was a part of the sermon that was directed to the individual problem for which he came. Now, Maimon was completely overblown by that. He stayed another few weeks, but he couldn't be there. He was too rational. And it's completely coming out of the paragraph. It's very interesting. He was much too rational for that. He couldn't stand all the miracles that were going around, and he began to look for reasons. How does he make it? So he came to the conclusion it must be. Now he has no proofs, but that's what he writes. It must be that the Maggid has spies on the crossroads in the way to the Maggid house, and the spies would write down the names and the places of origin of all the guests that are going to come, and he would have a list given to him before the Shabbat table. So he when he was saying the names, it was because he got this list. Now, obviously, proof to be told. Even if that's how it was done, very impressive, very impressive. But maybe even more impressive than having the Holy Spirit telling him the names. And be it as it may, Shlomo Maimon left, and he needed Mendelssohn. Fine, so he went and found his Mendelssohn. But the stories he left behind from the court of the Maggid are very powerful. We have many stories in these veins. Another beautiful story is the story of two visitors. One was already a chassid of the Maggid, and the other was, again, an old-fashioned Rav. There are many stories about old-fashioned Rabbanim coming to the court and having these different impressions. So an old-fashioned Rav, and he has a friend, and the friend is able to convince him to go to the Maggid and see the new light. Fine. So the Rav comes to the Maggid. Now, the Maggid was famous for, as I said, for the divrei Torah that he would give on his table, the table, the tish. Right? That's how the tish came to be. The tish is a table. So the table of the Maggid was known for the divrei Torah. And the visitor was sure that when this Rav would see the Torah of the Maggid, he would be completely conquered by it. Fine. So they come to the Shabbat dinner, right, to the night. And the Maggid speak, you can guess, only about horses. And the Maggid speak about horses for an hour. And the dinner ends, and the visitor, meaning the Chassid visitor, is a little embarrassed. He knows his Rebbe, so he's sure that everything is for the good, but he's a little embarrassed. And the Rav is sure that he knew all the way long the whole thing is a hoax. And maybe the reason why the Maggid is not confident enough to tell Torah, because here there is someone who is a real Rav, and if the Maggid would try to say his Torah, then he would be contradicted, because the Maggid is only able to present himself as a scholar in front of this Amei Haaretz, of the ignorant people that usually come to him. Okay, fine. Shabbat morning, the Chassid is able to convince the Rav to come also to Shabbat morning. Okay, so they come again to the tish, to the table. And again, the Maggid speak only about horses. And this horse walks that way and the other way. And the Rav cannot stand it anymore. So before Birkat Hamazon, the Rav says, people that sit down to eat and do not say divrei Torah, that's like eating from Avodah Zarah. So the Rav, this visitor Rav, gave a whole drasha. A pilpul, a long pilpul, Gemara, Rashi, Tosfot, 25 minutes spoke, and fine. And the Maggid is quiet, silence, no word. He's finished. They say Birkat Hamazon, fine. For Seudah Shlishit, the Rav didn't want to come. He said, I'm not going to this place of ignorant people. But there was no other place to eat. And again, his friend was very adamant. He was able to drag him to Seuda Shlishit. And again, no Torah at all, only speaking about horses. And again, the visitor gives a drasha in the end. And just let's go, right? Let's go. Let's leave the city. Let's leave Mezeritch and return home. No, we must say farewell to the Maggid before we go. Fine, we'll say farewell. They go to the Maggid again. And the Maggid sits with his chevraya, right? With his students, disciples for Melav Malka. And they say farewell. And then the Maggid says to the visitor, to the Rav, he says to him, you are a little disappointed, right? And the Rav says, he's quiet. And the Maggid says, he calls his youngest student and he asks him, now, please answer to the drasha given by our honored guest. And the youngest student is able to completely reject all the chidushim, all the drasha. You forgot this Tosfot, and you are wrong in this point in the Gemara, and there is a Mishnah you didn't mention, etc., etc., etc. So that's the youngest student of the Maggid. So the Rav now is completely confused. He says, if that is your youngest student, and obviously you are the Rav, so you are able to say much more, why do you speak about horses the whole time? The Maggid says, I don't think that you are supposed to be one of my Hasidim. But I want you to know that speaking about horses is also important. And by that, obviously, closed a circle with the story that made him a Hasid of the Baal Shem Tov. Now, he didn't explain himself. The story doesn't explain why speaking about horses is important. But I think that we already understand the answer because of the first story about horses not eating matzah. When you sit in a table, you cannot speak only divrei Torah. It's important, obviously, to speak about divrei Torah. But if you want to connect everyone, then we are made out of neshama and we are made out of body. And we should, obviously, on Shabbat, we are also eating, and it's not allowed to fast on Shabbat. So we need to connect our horses as well. That's the story of the horses of the Maggid. I wanted with you to learn, before we are closing this shiur, I wanted to learn not only stories. As I said, I think that stories are the main vehicle by which the Torah of the Maggid have been spread. But I also want to learn a few of the Torahs of the Maggid. Now, the Maggid didn't write any sefer, but there were, I think, 7 of his students that wrote down his thought. And by combining these 7 writings together, we are able to have a very good picture of the teachings of the Maggid. So let's speak about a pasuk from the next parasha. ויצא יעקב מבאר שבע וילך חרנה. So Yaakov went away from Beersheba and he went to Haran. And the Maggid begins by a very important statement. He says we should know that the Torah is beyond time. What does it mean that the Torah is beyond time? Even when the Torah speaks about a specific event that happened in a specific time in history, the Torah doesn't speak only about this event at that time in history. The Torah speaks to all times and to all people. So every one of us have Vayetze Yaakov miBe'er Sheva. It's not only about a story about our ancestor. It's a story about ourselves. When we read the Torah, and that's, I think, one of the most basic, fundamental Hasidic teachings, that the Torah speaks not only about what happened, but mostly about what is happening, about the present tense. So each one of us has Vayetze Yaakov miBe'er Sheva. But what does it mean? So he explains. He says, when a Rav learns with his student, then the Rav can open the doors of wisdom to the student. But nonetheless, the Rav has to adapt himself to the size of the student. You cannot pour too much, right? You must give the exact amount. Because if you would teach him too much beyond his level of understanding, then you would lose everything. He will not understand anything that you can teach him. And that is why, he says, that is why the student can affect the Rav. The student change the Rav. Not only the Rav is changing the student is also changing the Rav. That's why Vayetze Yaakov mi Be'er Shava. When Yaakov went away from Be'er Sheva, why it is important to say, and why we shouldn't only be told Vayelech Yaakov Haran, I went to Haran. Why it is important to mention that he went out of Be'er Sheva? Because leaving Be'er Sheva changed who he was. Now you'd have new students, not necessarily students, new people that you would interact with. It would change who he is. And now that is an extremely important lesson for all of us, being parents or being teachers or being in any position, especially when we affect others. Who are we affecting? Changing who we are. We tend to see ourselves maybe as the son, right? So I am a parent as the son, and the child can take for me whatever he can take. That is wrong. The sun is not affected. Maybe it is. I don't know. I'm not good enough in astronomy. But let's imagine for this discussion that the sun is not affected by Earth. The sun gives light. It gives warmth. It gives whatever it gives. And the planets take whatever they can take. Teacher is not like that. The teacher needs to be, and is, want or do not want, he is affected by the student. So that's why Vayetze Yaakov mi Be'er Shava. That's, I think, a beautiful lesson for us. We are changing according to the people that we are interacting with. Another Torah, this time from Parsha Toldot, from the Parsha that we've just finished, but a very similar one. And that is the pasuk that opened the Parsha that we read this Shabbat. Ve'ele Toldot Yitzchak ben Avraham, Avraham holid et Yitzchak. These are the children of Yitzchak, the son of Avraham, and then instead of immediately going to Esav and Yaakov, the children of Yitzchak, it returns now, the Torah returns to Avraham, who fathered Yitzchak. So the order of things is very interesting. Says the Maggid. You should know that there are two aspects in the love of a parent, here a father, but a parent to his child. One aspect is because he is your child. And that is a love that begins with the parent, and it moves the child to love the parent back. This love doesn't originate with the child. It originates with the parent himself. There is nothing the child would do to affect this love, right? Whatever the child would do is still my child, and I would love him because he's my child. So that is one aspect of the love between a child and a parent. But there is another aspect. When the child is, hopefully, is walking in the right path, in the right way, and is making his father happy. So there it's love that originates with the child and affects the parent. And every father, every mother have these two aspects of love. The love that originates within and the love that comes from the actions of the child. So says the Maggid, Ele toldot Yitzchak ben Avraham, Avraham holid et Yitzchak. When the child is going in the right way, in the right path, the love that comes out of the child's actions is even greater than the love that's coming out of just the natural fact that this is your child. That is why the pasuk begins, Ele toldot Yitzchak ben Avraham, the way that Yitzchak affected the love that Avraham has to him, and only then it says, Avraham holid et Yitzchak, the love that Avraham felt to Yitzchak as just being his child, regardless of who Yitzchak was, just as Avraham loved also his Ishmael. That was in a second place, in a second degree. Now, some of the researchers that go through the stories of the Maggid say, it's a very interesting point, the Maggid has a son, an only son, and in a very late age in his life. And they say that it may be that many of the stories of the Maggid, many of his Torot, are dealing with parent-child relationship because they bring to the table something that the Maggid was very much engaged in. His son was called Rabbi Avraham. He was called Avraham when he was born, and he was later became known as Rabbi Avraham HaMalach, the angel. And he was part of this Hasidic third generation. As you can understand from the stories and from the name, he was a source of pride for his father, and I guess that the Maggid was thinking about this type of a child when he said that the love coming from the child can be greater than the love coming from the parent, from the father. Now, the Maggid lived to Taf Kuf Lamed Bet, that is 1772. So from 1710, estimated, to 1772, not very old. And the story goes that now, all the time now, we spoke only about the Maggid and Hasidus, so it's a beautiful and nice stories. But as we, I guess, know, not everything was quiet on the Eastern Front. And the Hasidut had acquired many opposers who were called the Mitnagdim. And we spoke about the Vilna Gaon and his opposition, strong, vehement opposition to Hasidut. And some of the opposition came because of what we told in some of these stories, sitting on that Shabbat table speaking about horses. And the message does not, I think that for us it's easy to swallow this message, but back then, and especially for people that were completely steeped in Torah, as the Vilna Gaon and his circle, I mean, these were excuses for weaknesses. You're not engaged in Torah and you find reasons, rationales, why it's important to speak about horses. It's not important to speak about horses. It's important to learn Torah, and that's the end for them. That's the end of the story. So they were, as I said, opposing the Baal. Now, in the time of the Baal Shem Tov, he was not so known, so the opposition was also pretty weak. But when the Maggid became known and people were coming from all around Eastern Europe to him, and then when the third generation was beginning to rise, then the opposition was extremely, extremely strong. And the Maggid was always trying to tell his students, do not react. Whatever they do to you, just give your back and do not react, because the people that are opposing us are great Geonim, they are great genius of Torah, and they see that as the role. They do not do it out of evil, of wickedness. But as you can understand, for young students, it was extremely difficult because they were really harassed and persecuted, and their families were thrown away from, Torah, from Talmudei Torah, and it was extremely, extremely difficult. And at one point, they were complaining in front of the Maggid for what was done to Reb Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev. Now again, Reb Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev, for those who heard the stories, he was a symbol of pureness, of good heartedness, of being able to teach, to see the favor in each one of Am Israel. And the opposers, the Mitnagdim, were killing him, literally. And his family was suffering